Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare entrepreneurs about their lives and their careers. If you like this episode, I really hope that you will subscribe and have your friends do the same. My guest today is Dr. Reza Sanai. He is co-founder and CEO of Picasso MD. In today's episode, we'll focus on how his experience as a cardiologist, seeing patients who were unnecessarily referred to him, led him to build a new technology-enabled company to save all stakeholders money and time. Reza, welcome.
Thank you very much, David. Nice to see you, and I appreciate the opportunity to collaborate.
Great. Well, I love what you're doing. So let's talk about how you got there. Just starting off, kind of your background. What was your childhood like? Any early influences that have stuck with you for your career?
Yeah, pretty routine childhood. I'm a first generation American, so my parents emigrated from Iran, actually England, where I was born, and then eventually to the U.S. In the early '70s, and that did kind of shape me in a little bit because my mother and father separated. My father was a physician; he went back home, and so my mother, not speaking the language, became a seamstress, and so that did change my vantage point a little bit, just because it had a different connotation. A mother of a seamstress raising a child, that always helped shape my work ethic. My mother worked 2 jobs to raise me, and that always has stuck with me. That North Star facing vantage point and always working hard. Other basics, I grew up in the Northern Virginia area and the DC region. I had older siblings who are my idols. My brother is basically my idol. He's 14 years older than me. He's a physician, and I always wanted to be like him and continue to strive to be that way. And my sisters, they live overseas in Paris, and so their influence with me and through design thinking and through their work. That's kind of been my, like, if I was thinking about this leading up to the podcast, it's really been my mother, my brother, and my sisters kind of influencing my lens as a whole.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Well, I grew up in the DC area too, in Bethesda, and I was there in like '75. We had a lot of people coming over from Vietnam. I actually interviewed somebody on the podcast recently for that, and then '79, of course, there were a lot of folks coming from Iran. '80 around then, as well. As
Exactly.
memorable time. So.
I live in Bethesda now, so I should go visit your child.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, my parents still live there, and actually, it was 50 years ago today that we moved there, as my dad was telling me. So, pretty interesting. So, medical school. All right. So you had some influence that told you maybe to do that. Did you know you wanted to go to medical school? Like, did you hone in on that pretty early on, or?
I was one of those kids. Yeah, my brother was in medical school when I was a child. I was like, there's nothing else in my life that I want to be. Which is a blessing and a curse at the same time. In life, being exposed to things outside of what you think especially when you're a 10-year-old, every 10-year-old thinks they know what they want to do. And I was like, my only vantage point is that of being a physician. I can help it. It's a safe profession, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, went into that vantage point very early on. Was fortunate enough to get into medical school, did my training here in the DC region at George Washington University. And then basically stayed on after meeting my wife, who is also a physician, stayed on for residency and my fellowship, was a chief fellow there until transitioning to my local practice here in the DC region.
So cardiology, was that also, did you know that about that when you were 10 too, or when did that come in?
No, I'm just really not that smart, honestly. So like for me, it's I can't memorize things. I have a visual memory, but things have to be organized. 1 + 1 = 2, 2 × 2 = 4. I can follow that logic, but just to give me brute memory was never my thing. And cardiology is a very logical field. You can, it just fit naturally. And I always wanted to think that my work was going to make a significant impact, and cardiology checks that box as well. So no, it was just because I was decent at it and it fit my brain and my limitations, and it checked the box of impact. So that's why I went into cardiology.
Okay, that's a good logical reason. I think that's to make sense. And sounds like you're a local practice for a while, but at some point you had an inspiration and needed to start Picasso MD. So what was that inspiration?
I've always been tried to believe that I have been a value-based provider and a provider and patient advocate. So, when I always look back on this, one of the things that I just realized recently is when part of it is social and just my lack of job satisfaction. So I went to cardiology, became co-managing partner of a practice, and had a decent livelihood. But what I realized is every day I would go in and I would see 20 patients. And I would just live in my world of 20 patients. I maybe would see a colleague in the hallway. I'd write my notes and I'd go home. Copy and paste. You get a fax referral, see my patients, go home. No interaction with my colleagues. And over time, what I was seeing was in my office, and I actually did an internal audit, eight out of my 20 patients were either for, bounce out to the emergency room, which I was like, God, I wish they had just pinged me. There's
Yeah.
no need for that patient to have been sent to the emergency room. Or for cases which I understood why they were sent, but honestly probably didn't need to be sent to me directly. So more out of kind of like just wanted to practice different type of medicine. I went to a very large practice. It was about 7 or 8 offices. They had a all hands meeting, and I went over there with my buddy Will, and I said, "Hey, Will, I want to come and give a little talk." And I went over there and I said, "Listen, I know this sounds odd, but I want to do a little trial for 3
Yeah.
months, and it's going to be ER0. And from now on, anytime any one of your providers have a question, you're going to ping me, big or small. Especially if you're going to send someone to the emergency room, ping me. I'll get them over right away. We can avoid the ER visit, and let's see how that goes." So fast forward, 3 months go by, and Will comes by and goes, "Reza, you won't believe this." I go, "What's up?" He goes, "Our ER rates." Yeah. He goes, "0 for cardiology. Our cardiology referral rates down 44%. And at the beginning, I actually didn't understand what he was saying because my volume had tripled during that
Yeah.
same time frame.
Okay.
So I was like, how is it possible we're actually decreasing overall referrals, but yet my referrals are going up? And it created an aha moment of sorts where by just being a decent person and being available, we're avoiding unnecessary care or avoidable health
Yeah.
care. But by being available and by being a decent provider, at the same point, there was creating bridges of trust. And as a result of that, they felt comfortable sending me patients over. So that's when I had this general concept of, well, if one provider can make an impact, somewhat of an impact for 40 PCPs, what if we could take this concept and scale it? Where if a provider at the point of care had a question, cardiology question, they could hit a button and get matched with a cardiologist. A GI question, hit a button and get matched with a gastroenterologist, derm, ortho, etc. If we could create that real-time collaboration, wouldn't that result in better decision-making, reflexively less ER visits, and probably less specialist referrals for those borderline cases? And that's kind of what we created. We created a model where one aspect of what we do is create this real-time clinical decision support, across 30 plus disciplines at this point. And then the second question is, well, great, I don't need to send the patient to emergency room for this heart rhythm disturbance, but what if where do I send them? So part 2 is, okay, don't send emergency room, but send them here.
Yeah.
And then actually operationalizing that transition from a PCP office to a local value-based specialist.
Sounds so simple, You have a way of kind of like dumbing it down so that we can understand it, and but we know the healthcare system doesn't work like that in general.
It's literally that simple. Just
Yeah.
if you can create a process of communication, streamline it, create redundancy in that workflow. So like in general, we have 6 layers of logic, but in the end, there's always a network available to answer questions.
Yeah.
And then we work with local specialists, empowering them. Despite what people think, most docs are out there, even though they live in a fee-for-service world, who want to practice at the top of their license, who want to do the right things. And all we're doing is enabling that, empowering them to do so. And as a result, there's a demand side where a provider doesn't know where to send a patient. There's a supply side. There's a provider who's willing to help out. And all we are really is just an intermediary that matches the two.
It's interesting on the emergency room side. It really is, I think, in general, kind of when somebody ends up in the emergency room, typically a failure. If someone's in a car crash or something like that, or they're having an MI, presumably they need to go to the emergency room. But
Sure.
a lot of times it's just, even if you call the doctor's office at 5:01, Or even if it's just on hold, it says, if this is emergency, hang up and dial 911. They're going to take you to the emergency room, which is probably not where you need to be. And what's interesting is there's clearly the demand is there, but I think what's a little bit new to me is you're saying, hey, the supply is there too. Actually, that resource is available. That expert resource to answer the question in the moment is also available if you organize it right.
Yeah, 100%. If you think about it, I, as a cardiologist, in 10 years of practice, literally sent 8 patients ever to the emergency room. And they were for like real emergencies. Everything else I could handle in my office, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate, as a primary care provider, they're not going to want to deal with things that I don't necessarily need to send to emergency room. But if instead of forcing that decision onto a PCP, if I could just say, hey, here's a cardiologist who can help out, well then, 999 out of 1,000 times we can avoid the ER. And say, don't send them to the ER, just send them right over. And it's good for the specialist because, one, it's building a bridge. It's building a bridge of relationships with the PCP. But simultaneously, instead of that patient being sent to the emergency room and lost forever, we're actually rerouting them to that specialist so that they can actually capture that patient. So it's creating a win-win-win proposition, win for the PCP specialist and the patient themselves.
And then the cardiologist presumably is now maybe going to have the time to focus on the patients that actually need to be there in the cardiologist office,
Exactly.
as opposed to went to the emergency department, and ones that didn't need to be referred to you in the first place, they don't have to come.
Exactly. And so if we can eliminate, to a certain extent, cases that don't need to be seen in my office, open those slots up for higher acuity patients.
Yeah.
There's plenty of volume. That's never been an issue. It's really just curating that volume and making sure the right patients are getting to the right specialist at the right time.
So Picasso is a nice name. How did you decide that was going to be the name of the company?
Yeah, well, it's again, I'm a simple man, so I always tell people 80% of what we do as providers is science. I mean, we went to school, we read it, and we generally can come up with an assessment plan that's accurate. But the true art is conveying that in a way that the patient internalizes and believes, and the PCP, or the initiating provider, internalizes and believes. If David walks into my office and I'm completely dismissive to you about your chest pain, and you walk out of my office feeling like I didn't listen to you, even if I was accurate in my diagnosis, it's useless. It's that ability, that last 15, 20%, which is the key, that allows us to kind of convey real medicine. And so Picasso MD, the famous artist, art of medicine, origin.
Yeah, sounds good. So let's talk about what the system is like for those that are in it. So as a patient, like what might my experience be? I'm gonna go to my primary care physician. I'm gonna say I've been having whatever kind of symptoms I'm gonna describe, and then how does it feel different to me as that patient?
Yeah, the beauty is you're a patient and you can walk into any clinic, primary care office, urgent care, retail clinic, even to your virtual primary care. The entry point is the same, and as the healthcare landscape changes, the entry point doesn't matter. So you walk into your primary care office and listen, I'm having some chest pains, and I'm not feeling too comfortable. If you boil it down, whether you're an MD at a high value practice in DC or a nurse practitioner in rural Mississippi, in that moment, you have 3 choices to make for that patient. You can diagnose and treat them, get the EKG, know exactly what's wrong with them, and send them home. Or you can say, listen, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about the symptoms, or I'm not completely sure what to do with this EKG. I'm not overly worried, but I'm going to send you out to cardiology. Or you say, listen, I'm not dealing with this. I'm not comfortable with this EKG at all. David's presenting with chest pain. I'm sending to the emergency room. And so as a provider, instead of being forced to make a decision, it literally is an app, mobile or web, and they hit the Picasso MD app, step 1. They hit, this, we call it the magic blue button, the first available curbside button. Step 2, choose cardiology, and then they get matched. And about, on average, actually last month, our median time to connectivity was 22 seconds. So as a provider, you say, hey, David, I'm going to run your case by a cardiologist now. And then there is a dictated or typed message. We attach images, obviously, all through a SOC 2 certified application. but there's real-time connectivity and collaboration and synchronous communication regarding the case. So within, on average, 6 or 7 minutes, the communication is ended, and the provider can say to David, "Hey, David, listen, I ran your EKG and case by a cardiologist. Overall, the pattern is not concerning for anything acute, so we're not going to send you to the emergency room. But given your risk factor profile, the best next steps, go ahead and send you over to cardiology. You should receive a text in the next 30 seconds with the referral information for the cardiologist." And so now, as a patient, even if there's not a final answer to your chest pain, you still don't know if it's cardiac or not. That information helps reframe your anxiety around this. There's also directionality. You know why you're being sent to cardiology, and the next step has already been mapped out for you. So that as a patient, hopefully is a different world compared to what I've experienced as a consumer of the healthcare system with my wife, where we
Yeah,
literally are living in silo and we're given an appointment date 12 weeks from now.
right. So, okay, so then this cardiologist is going to be the first available. So the one that the PCP does the consultation with is probably not the one that the patient's going to be referred to. Is that right, or is there some connectivity there as well?
No, there is context. So we always prioritize, always, local first.
Yeah,
And so we have literally, like I said, 6 layers of logic. 1 through 5 is all based on provider preferences, local providers, people who have been identified as high value specialists, and just prioritizing the platform. Meaning
yeah,
I, in DC, 97% of those communications are handled within the DC market.
yeah.
3% of the time does it leave the DC market for that just real-time clinical decision support. And so it's always that prioritization of local providers within that algorithm that allows it to be matched to that specialist and sent usually. So
Got it.
we always try to reinforce the existing network, and only if they're not available does someone help pinch hit just for the clinical decision support. But at the time of the referral, still goes local, obviously.
Okay. So then you mentioned that the patient then knows, why they're being referred. Now there's also the other side of it, which is typically the specialist, when you get there, has no idea why you're there. And even if it sounds like
Beautiful.
there's a whole bunch of communication that's gone on, it usually hasn't. So do you address that issue?
Yeah, and we can verify that I did not plant this question. We
No,
have not met until
that's
a few
right.
minutes ago. Yeah, exactly right. So problem one is, what do I do with this patient? ER, do I send him out or do I send him home? Right, and if the decision is made to refer, then that exact problem is the next step. I, as a cardiologist, when I received the patient, when I walked into the office, I had no context of why you were there.
Yeah,
I had no idea who sent you. I would say, "Hey, David, nice to see you. Who sent you and why are you here?" And you
right.
would ready to stab me because you've been waiting six
Yeah,
weeks because of this abnormal EKG, and I had no context. So to solve that, it's pretty straightforward. There's 2 levels of people who need to have visibility into the referral: the provider and the back office. And so all we do is when a referral is sent to the platform, it automatically notifies the specialist. And so when I see my friend Will sent me a patient, I obviously am going to receive that referral. I'm going to check in on that referral. And then all we do is create accounts for the back office as well. And we create these almost Slack-like communications so that the PCP and specialists have direct visibility into the referral and can communicate back and forth regarding it. The specialists can communicate directly with their back office staff. So when I get a referral, and I see patients on Saturdays, I'll message directly into the referral, "Hey, cardio care team, please get this patient in ASAP, double book for 8:15 on Saturday." And that's automatically getting passed back to the back office of the PCP as well, and to the provider. And so simply by surfacing referrals, giving status updates to those referrals at the provider and back office level, and creating communication channels around it, it allows for a more seamless transition.
So you started off with this, proof of concept with your friend, showed that things could work out. How does it work from a business standpoint? Because some of these things have to do with, even if people want to do the right thing, the providers sometimes it's they can't do it and stay in business, or it's really working against their own interest, or there's some other rules or things that get in the way. So what do you do kind of on the business side? You mentioned value-based providers, and is sort of a move toward value-based care enabling you to do what you're doing and vice versa? Or how do these things all come together?
Right. So I'm gonna paint you a picture in a value-based world, and also paint you a picture in a fee-for-service world. So our general partners are risk-bearing entities, so payers, ACOs, advanced primary care groups, entities that are trying to enable their primary care network to execute value-based arrangements. And what we're simply doing is helping them execute in those value-based arrangements. One is if every time we avoid the ER visit, we're saving, $1,300. Every time we send a specialist referral, it's actually saving, if you include downstream costs, et cetera, several $100s. That by itself is a value prop. And then the second concept is if we can help build networks locally and kind of surface really high quality specialists and create directionality and efficiency of getting a patient from point A to point B, that also layers in an additional layer of savings as well as of efficacy in care. So that's what allows us to kind of partner with these paid partners who take on the payment, keep things free for the PCP, keep things free for the specialist. The PCP is actually in the end financially going to do better because they're saving, and the specialists end up doing better because now we have data and metrics supporting their cause, and they're creating pipelines of referrals to them. So that's value-based. It literally, we are aligning ourselves with the payers, PCPs, and specialists, so it's a win for all. And for those in a fee-for-service world, again, one of the key, when I started my practice, I went out and knocked on doors, said, hey, here's my name, here's my business card, here's my mobile number, call me if you ever need me. That's how I built my practice, like literally. Yeah. And then when they came to me, I was just a nice guy and did the right things and would circle back to the PCP. As a specialist, just by being available, affable, and able, we are creating a digitized version of actually scaling that availability, creating increased visibility for the local providers, and creating a network so that they feel like the PCPs know that the specialists on the platform are there to kind of help. And that's what creates this ethos. It's not about Picasso. It's really about being part of that thought process, that cultural North Star, that by improving connectivity, improving communication, improving transitions of care, we can actually make an impact on all levels.
So, you mentioned the incredible results that you had early on with the kind of the pilot, informal pilot. What sort of results do you get at scale? And to what extent can you replicate that? And then what things can you actually enable because you've got a bigger scale?
Yeah, and it's crazy. The data hasn't changed. Like I used to fixate on it like daily. Now I fixate on it weekly. But 88% reduction in ER rates, so nearly 90% reduction in ER rates, and near 50% in avoidable referrals. And then the referrals themselves are average time to consultation is about 8 days.
Yeah.
Again, it's if you create collaboration, it makes sense that if a provider has a borderline case for abnormal EKG, for instance, for pre-op, but there's no symptoms, there's no findings, and the EKG is actually a normal variant, that patient could be avoided. So as a whole, it's about 88% reduction in ER rates. Like I said, near 50% reduction in referrals, and the time to consultation is about 7 to 10 days, depending on the market. And the ability for a provider to literally download the app and within 5 minutes have a virtual multi-specialty clinic in their pocket, like that's kind of a game changer. Like you download the app, literally 5 minutes later, you can hit a button and get matched with a specialist. Especially in parts of the country, like this is where we take pride in. We actually came out with a little health equity piece about this. That in rural populations that are have specialty deserts, or in underserved populations, especially in community health centers, the ability for those providers to actually have access to specialists in real time instead of waiting 10 months for a referral to go to neurology, I think has in some ways changed the landscape, especially in that population.
Very interesting. So how much traction have you gotten up to this point? Where does the company stand in its life cycle, and where are you trying to get to in the next year or two?
Yeah, we're still early on. We started off with 3 providers in DC. Now we're several hundred in DC, and now I've expanded beyond DC. So I think we're at 7 or 8 markets now, including Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia, Texas, Florida, and the goal is by the end of next year will be actually probably closer to 20 markets, and closer to about 5,000 total providers on the platform. So, we've been fortunate enough that thankfully we're executing on our talk. I always say stop talking and just do.
Yeah.
And so our major
So you
focus
got to
is really
start
just
turning. You have to turn down the podcast interviews if you're going to do that, though.
No, it's all about the ecosystem, my friend. I will never turn that down. It's about the larger movement. So right now it's about, thankfully, we've expanded within our partnerships that we've already established and kind of just growing that. So hopefully about 20 markets by the end of next year.
Nice. Now, with all that you're doing, do you have any time for reading any books, and do you have anything to recommend?
I do read. I try to read about 30 minutes a day at a minimum. I'm rereading a book that I really love by Moore, Crossing the Chasm, which is really talking about the different personalities and kind of getting users with different mentalities to kind of adopt technology. And I just started by Chen, The Cold Start Problem. These are old books, oldie but goodies. Again, about network build and kind of getting people over pattern recognition initially and getting engagement. So those are the two books that I'm reading now.
Oh, those sound good. It's good to have the older ones because that means that I could find it in the library, or even online in the library and get an ebook and download it, as opposed to having to wait a long time. Well, Dr. Reza Sanai, co-founder and CEO of Picasso MD, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.